Operation Jubilee, the second major action fought by the Canadian Army in the Second World War after the defense of Hong Kong, was a large-scale raid on the French coastal port of Dieppe in northern France. 5,000 men of the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division and 1,000 more of numbers 3, 4, 10, and 40 Commandos were sent ashore early in the morning of 19th of August, 1942. Number 4 Commando, led by Lieutenant Colonel Lord Lovett, arrived at Orange Beach to the west of the town, their objective the Hesse Coastal Battery. They landed on either side of the guns and converged on their objective. Detailed as liaison between the two detachments was 24-year-old Captain Porteous, a former artillery officer and veteran of the 1940 French campaign, who volunteered for the Commandos soon after the Dunkirk evacuation. Shortly after coming ashore, a bullet went through his hand and into his arm. He kept up his advance, closed the German rifleman who'd shot him, and killed him with his bayonet. The 2nd detachment of the Commando, meanwhile, was in very serious trouble, losing its officers and troop sergeant major. Seeing this, Captain Porteous ran across open ground to take over the other detachment, rallied the men, and led them in a successful attack on the nearest German position, capturing it at bayonet point in spite of a round through his leg. In spite of this further wound, he stayed with his men until they'd captured the German battery. Unlike the majority of men who came ashore at Dieppe that morning, out of 6,000, 3,600 were killed, wounded, or captured, Captain Porteous made it home. 2 years later, he hit the beaches at Normandy and helped capture Ouistreham. He remained in the army post-war, serving in Germany, the Middle East, and Singapore, before retiring in 1970 as a colonel. He moved on to insurance and real estate, as well as many charities, including the Commando Benevolent Association, before his death in 2000. At the same time as Captain Porteous and 4 Commando were landing at Orange Beach, the men of the South Saskatchewan Regiment were coming ashore onto Green Beach at Pourville, between the Commandos and Dieppe itself. Unfortunately, many of the landing craft had gone off course, and most of the Canadians landed in the wrong place, to the west of Pourville rather than the east. This meant that they had to cross the town, more specifically via a bridge, to get to their objective, the Hindenburg Battery. The Germans set up anti-tank guns and machine guns to cover the bridge and stop the South Saskatchewan's advance, inflicting heavy losses on them. 33-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Merritt, who had served in the militia for 10 years before the outbreak of war while working as a lawyer, saw that the advance needed to resume, so he waved his helmet and ran across the bridge, urging others to follow him. In turn, he led 4 separate parties across the bridge, and then led attacks on the German positions beyond. He took 2 wounds but kept up the fight, going from position to position to keep abreast of everyone after his runners had become casualties. Finally, the South Saskatchewans and the Cameron Highlanders of Canada began to pull back, neither having been able to reach the German battery. While organizing the withdrawal, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt still stayed very much involved in the fighting, even personally stalking and killing a German sniper. He finally set up a last defensive position to cover the evacuation from the beach, opting to stay behind and be captured so as many others as possible could get back. The following summer, he was part of a large-scale escape but was recaptured and sent to Colditz Castle, the prison of many other famous men such as Douglas Bader and Charles Upham. In June 1945, almost immediately after coming home at war's end, he was elected to the Canadian House of Commons as a Conservative for Vancouver-Burrard, serving 4 years before losing in 1949. His post-war career was much as it had been pre-war, practicing law and serving in the militia, including some time commanding the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada. His death in 2000 at 91, he was one of only 2 living Canadian VCs. Further to the east, landing near Dieppe itself on red and white beaches, were 3 Canadian infantry battalions and a Royal Marine Commando. They were meant to be supported by tanks of the Cavalry Regiment, but delays in their arrival meant that the infantry made their initial assault alone against well-placed German positions in the cliffs. With the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry was its chaplain, 38-year-old Captain John Foote, who had enlisted 3 months after the outbreak of war. He worked from the regimental aid post on the beach in a very exposed spot, not only assisting the medical officer in helping wounded men, but also frequently leaving the position to give aid to other wounded and carry them back to the aid post. He did this for 8 hours before the aid post was moved to a stranded landing craft on the beach, where he kept up this work, at one point removing men from the landing craft after ammunition inside had been set afire. When other landing craft appeared for the final evacuation from the beach, he worked to carry more wounded to them. He finally decided not to board a craft himself, preferring to stay and minister to those who'd been captured. To this end, he was sent to a prison camp for enlisted men at his own request, giving sermons from a pulpit made of Red Cross boxes. On being freed at war's end, he stayed with the chaplain service for 3 more years before entering politics himself, Unlike Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, he chose Queen's Park instead of Ottawa, being elected to the Ontario legislature for Durham as a Conservative 3 times and serving in the government of Leslie Frost. Like the other 2 Dieppe VCs, he had a long life, dying just 3 days short of his 84th birthday in Ontario in 1988.